December 7th, 1941, 06:02 a.m., Pearl Harbor, Battleship Row. The water is still black, glassy, almost peaceful. Beneath it, the steel hull of USS West Virginia shifts gently against her moorings, the way a sleeping giant might exhale before rising. Sailors on the main deck move quietly in the pre-dawn dim, boots tapping against steel, murmuring to one another as they begin another ordinary Sunday morning. No one notices the silhouettes forming in the sky to the north. A lone seaman, Quartermaster Third Class Theodore Peters, steps onto the deck and flinches at the cold breeze rolling down from the Ko'olau Range. He pulls his jacket tight. He doesn't know what the faint mechanical hum is at first. It's distant, but growing. He squints upward. What he sees doesn't make sense. Dozens, no, scores, of aircraft descending out of the sunrise in perfect formation, sun glinting off wings, engines screaming louder, tighter, faster. For a moment Peters simply freezes, until he sees the red circles on their wings. His coffee cup slips from his hand and shatters across the deck. Alarms begin screaming before he can. You can almost feel the panic erupt across the harbor in the space of a heartbeat. Sailors sprinting, officers shouting, boots scrambling for stations. And above it all, the first torpedoes slice into the harbor like silver knives, their wakes flashing in the morning light. The first slams into the battleship USS Oklahoma. The second heads straight for West Virginia. Inside the ship's steel belly, men are just beginning to reach battle stations when the torpedo detonates against her port side. The explosion snarls through the passageways, tearing open compartments and throwing men from ladders. Lights flicker, bulkheads groan. Smoke rolls through the vent lines. Within seconds, water surges in like a living thing. Damage Control Officer J.G. Richard B. McGinnis tries to shout orders, but the next torpedo hits before he finishes the sentence. Then another, Each one hammers the ship sideways, buckling plates, ripping open seams. Above deck, gunners are firing back, fists shaking, eyes filled with fury. But it's chaos, total chaos. West Virginia lists sharply to port. Men lose their footing. Some are thrown clean off the deck into the flaming water. Deep in the engine rooms, sailors fight to seal compartments even as the sea floods in around their legs. They don't think about surviving. They think about buying the ship a few more seconds of life, a few more chances for others to get out. Smoke fills the passageways until men can barely see the hand in front of them. Somewhere in the darkness, the intercom crackles. Abandon ship, abandon ship. For many, it's too late. The deck tilts harder, 10 degrees, 15, 20. From the harbor, other sailors watch helplessly as West Virginia slowly slumps, her masts leaning toward the sky like a giant mourning angel. Flames reflect off the burning oil around her, turning the battleship into a silhouette of black steel against an inferno. At 10 a.m., the great ship is half submerged, swallowed by the harbor she once guarded. To the sailors who watch her sink, one truth is painfully clear. West Virginia is dead. Across the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles away. Inside the wireless room aboard the German auxiliary cruiser Thor, a young radioman twists the dial, listening to the frantic Allied transmissions bouncing across the Pacific. He doesn't understand every English word, but he doesn't need to. The tone tells him everything. The radioman turns to Kapitän zur See Otto Kähler, face pale. Amerikanisches Schlachtschiff versenkt. An American battleship sunk. Kähler allows a thin smile. Not because he enjoys the loss of life, but because every battleship removed from the Pacific is one less steel pillar of American naval power. One more advantage for the Axis cause. One more reason to believe victory in the Pacific, and perhaps the world, is possible. Over the next days, the Kriegsmarine's Intelligence Corps sift through Japanese field reports. The news spreads quietly, then confidently, through officers' messes and strategy rooms. USS West Virginia, sunken at Pearl Harbor, destroyed irrecoverable. Just another corpse added to the graveyard at Battleship Row. And yet, something about that ship sticks in the minds of more than one German naval officer. Not the name, not the guns, not even the armor. But the reputation— West Virginia, a young U-boat officer remarks during a briefing, was supposed to be one of their tough ones. Another scoffs. Toughness doesn't matter when you're at the bottom of a harbor, and they all nod, confident, certain. Why wouldn't they be? Battleships don't rise from the dead, especially not ones hit by 7 torpedoes and 2 bombs. Naval warfare has rules, brutal rules, but rules nonetheless. A ship that goes down like that stays down, right? But in Honolulu, divers begin the grim process of recovering bodies and surveying the wrecks. What they find surprises even them. West Virginia didn't capsize like Oklahoma. She settled into the mud upright, her superstructure shattered, her hull torn, but her spine, her keel, still intact. It's not hope, not yet. But it's not hopeless. And in a small, dimly lit briefing room, Commander Homer N. Wallin, the man soon to be known as the miracle worker of Pearl Harbor, spreads diagrams across a table. This ship, he says softly, almost to himself, isn't done. The other officers stare at him, some confused, some skeptical, some wondering if the stress has finally cracked the man. Wallin just taps the drawing again. You don't leave a ship like this to rot. Outside, the harbor still stinks of oil and death. Smoke still lingers on the water, but something new is beginning to take shape, something fragile, controversial, uncertain. A plan, one that will push divers, welders, engineers, and salvors to the brink of exhaustion. One that will test the limits of what the Navy can drag back from oblivion. One that German sailors, confident in their assumptions, certain they understand American industrial capacity, would soon hear rumors of. Rumors they wouldn't believe. Not yet, but they will. Because the mud-covered, gutted, waterlogged corpse of USS West Virginia is about to challenge the laws of naval warfare and return to the fight. They just don't know it yet. And far across the world, in a dimly lit U-boat wardroom, German officers laugh over maps of the Pacific. One leans forward, grinning. Americans build like giants, but when a giant falls, even they cannot raise it again. If only they knew what was already happening beneath the waters of Pearl Harbor. Something impossible, something daring, something the world will soon witness with disbelief. And it begins quietly tomorrow morning, before sunrise. The next morning, long before dawn, Pearl Harbor is unnaturally quiet. No alarms, no explosions, only the soft churn of small boats cutting across the dark water, carrying divers dressed in heavy canvas suits that smell of oil and rust. Floodlights cast pale cones across the harbor, revealing the broken silhouettes of battleships still slumped at their berths. The air tastes of fuel. The water is cold, flat, lifeless, except around West Virginia. Here the silence feels different, charged, expectant, like a theater stage moments before the curtain rises. Commander Homer Wallin stands on a barge just off her port side, coat zipped high, clipboard in hand. In the dim light, the battleship looks enormous, even in ruin, her masts leaning awkwardly, her hull half buried in oily water. She feels less like a ship and more like a sunken cathedral. Wallin takes a slow breath. Let's begin. His voice is calm, steady, but in his chest, his heart is hammering. He knows exactly how insane this mission is. Raising a battleship this damaged isn't salvage work, it's resurrection. One diver, Chief Warrant Officer Amos Hathaway, sits on the edge of the barge as a deckhand secures the heavy brass helmet over his head. Hathaway taps the side of the helmet twice, the signal to seal it. A moment later, the diver is lowered into the black water with a hiss of air and a splash that disappears instantly. The moment he vanishes beneath the surface, the world changes. Down there, the water swallows sound. It's cold enough to bite through 3 layers of rubber. Visibility is almost non-existent, just drifting clouds of silt and fuel swirling like underwater smoke. The beam from Hathaway's helmet lamp catches only twisted metal and mangled girders. He moves slowly, gloved hands brushing along the jagged edges of the hull, searching. The first task is simple on paper. Find every hole the torpedoes blasted into the ship. In reality, it's like trying to locate the wounds on a carcass in a pitch-black graveyard. Up above, Wallin listens to the diver's muffled voice crackling through the headset. Port side. I count 3 major breaches, 2 minor. Hold on. Make that 4 major. Wallin closes his eyes. 4 major holes means weeks of patching, just to make the hull watertight enough for pumping. But the real danger isn't the holes, it's what's inside. When the divers reach the lower compartments, their lights illuminate floating debris, bunks, lockers, gear bags, drifting slowly like ghosts. The water tastes metallic and sour from fuel oil. It carries a smell even the helmet filters can't completely block. And in the stillness of those submerged rooms, the divers find bodies. Sailors trapped behind watertight doors, men caught in collapsing bulkheads, entire compartments sealed during the chaos to keep the ship afloat a few minutes longer. Hathaway's breathing trembles through the comm line. Should we recover them? Wallin swallows hard. Not yet. First priority is the ship. Mark the compartment. We'll bring the chaplains when it's time. The divers do as ordered, but the silence afterward is heavy. Up on the surface, the salvage crews begin building cofferdams, massive wooden and steel patches that will be bolted over the holes in the hull. They must seal the ship like a punctured lung. Carpenters work with blazing speed, hammers cracking before the sun even rises. Sparks shower from acetylene torches as welders cut away twisted plating. Cranes groan, lifting debris so heavy the cables tremble visibly. Supply ships bring truckloads of timbers, steel plates, pumps, hoses, and fresh crews. All of it for one idea. One impossible idea. Make the ship float again. As the days turn to weeks, divers go down dozens of times a day. Some return with shaking hands. Others cough up seawater or collapse from exhaustion the moment they're hauled onto the barge. The oil slick grows thick on their suits, so thick it takes kerosene to scrub it off each night. But every day West Virginia changes. A plate bolted here, a seam sealed there. More compartments pumped dry, more of her internal skeleton exposed to the light. News spreads quietly through Pearl Harbor. They're raising her. West Virginia's coming back. No way, she took 7 torpedoes. Go see for yourself. Workers from other salvage operations begin drifting over during breaks, standing on nearby scaffolds just to watch. They whisper among themselves as if observing a miracle in progress. And far across the ocean, the first rumors trickle through Allied intelligence networks in London and Washington. American battleship being refloated, possibly California, possibly Nevada. No one mentions West Virginia at first. No one would believe it. But in Berlin, the German Naval High Command, busy routing U-boats, drafting new shipping protection plans, and analyzing Japanese after-action reports, receives a fragmentary intelligence summary. Multiple American battleships undergoing salvage operations. Kapitän Lieutenant Erich Traub reads the line twice, frowning. He makes a note in the margin. Likely propaganda. Beside him, another officer chuckles. Let the Americans pretend a sunken battleship is a sunken battleship. Back at Pearl Harbor, it's nearly midnight when a crane lowers yet another massive patch into place. The welders work under floodlights, sparks cascading over the dark water like a second meteor shower. Wallin stands on the platform, arms folded, watching every detail. A young officer approaches, hesitant. Sir, even if we get her floating, she's gutted inside. Machinery ruined. Electrical systems fried. Are we sure she'll ever be seaworthy? Wallin doesn't answer immediately. He studies the battered hull instead, imagining her restored, rearmed, reborn. Then he says quietly, She will sail again, mark my words. The officer nods but doesn't look convinced. At 02:14 a.m., the last weld cools. The pumps roar to life. It begins slowly, so slowly that men standing on the deck can't tell if it's working. But after 2 hours, the water level inside the ship drops by a measurable inch. By dawn, it's 4 inches. By noon, it's a foot. Sailors cheer. Some slap the bulkheads like the flank of a loyal horse. Others just stand in silence, stunned, as the once-dead battleship begins rising, inch by inch from the grave she had settled into. And then on a clear June morning, 6 months after she was destroyed, West Virginia breaks the surface with a groan that echoes across the harbor. You can almost feel the harbor breathe in. Sailors on every nearby ship stop what they're doing. Men climb under rails for a better look. Some salute. Others wipe their eyes. For the first time since the attack, Pearl Harbor feels victorious. That afternoon, An American journalist files a short dispatch. Battleship West Virginia successfully refloated. Salvage operations continue. The message bounces across the Pacific, hops from relay to relay, then lands quietly in a stack of decrypted Allied intelligence messages in Europe. A German analyst picks it up, reads it, and frowns. This time he doesn't laugh. He rereads the line twice, then a third time. No, impossible. But it's not impossible. It's already happening. And the shockwave hasn't even started. Because floating is just the beginning. Next comes rebuilding her from the inside, refitting her, rearming her, turning a resurrected wreck into a ship of war. A ship that will return to the Pacific with more firepower than the Japanese ever expected. A ship German officers assumed would rot at the bottom of Pearl Harbor forever. A ship that will one day steam into battle like a ghost that refuses to stay buried. And when she does, the world will take notice. But first, she has to survive the most dangerous phase of all, the tow. The morning of the tow begins with a strange kind of quiet, a heavy, watching silence that settles over Pearl Harbor like morning fog. It's July 1942 now, half a year since the attack, but the scars are still everywhere. Charred superstructures, hulls ripped open, steel twisted like paper. The harbor's a graveyard, and through that graveyard, USS West Virginia must now make her slow, dangerous passage. Men gather along the rails of nearby ships, leaning forward, elbows pressed hard into steel. Some hold cameras, others hold their breath. Salvage crews stand on barges, boots slick with oil, ropes coiled at their feet. Officers watch from the decks of tugs painted with fresh navy gray. They all stare at the same thing. West Virginia, now floating, but battered nearly beyond recognition. Her decks are jagged holes and scaffolding. Her turrets are empty, scorched, pitted with shrapnel. Her once proud superstructure is a skeleton of girders wrapped in temporary planks and welding tents. The smell of burned fuel still clings to her like a memory she can't wash off. But she floats, for now. Commander Wallin climbs a ladder to the highest platform overlooking the ship. He shields his eyes from the rising sun. Even he feels a tremor of doubt as he takes in the sight. "Are we ready?" he asks. Chief Engineer Ralph Denning nods, though his jaw is tight. "As ready as we'll ever be. If the internal patches hold, she'll make it. If they don't..." Wallin finishes for him. "She'll sink again." The words fall heavy. A diver on the barge nearby crosses himself. Two harbored tugs, YT-153 Kaneohe and YT-142 Waipio, move slowly into position, small but powerful, their bows nudging against the battleship's sides. Thick hawsers are thrown across, ropes thudding onto the deck like falling tree limbs. Deckhands scramble to secure them. The lead tug sounds its horn, a deep rolling note, the kind that feels like a heartbeat. Everyone stops, looks, listens. This is it. "Bring her ahead," Wallin orders. The tugs throttle up. Ropes go rigid, water foams, and slowly, painfully slowly, USS West Virginia begins to move. Her bulk shifts through the harbor like a wounded beast, every foot of progress watched by hundreds of eyes. The water churns beneath her, swirling with the oil still bleeding from her hull. Her bow cuts through the slick like a prow through tar. The creaking is the worst part. Every man hears it, the groan of steel under strain, echoing across the harbor, making nerves spike. It sounds like a ship resisting its own resurrection, like the ocean tugging at her ankles, trying to drag her back under. The tugs pull harder. She inches forward. Divers swim alongside her hull, watching for leaks. One pops up, lifts his mask, and shouts toward the barge. "Starboard hull looks good." Another surfaces moments later. "Port side's holding." Wallin exhales just a little. But the hardest part is still ahead, navigating past the shattered remains of Arizona and Oklahoma, where underwater debris lies scattered like caltrops waiting to rip open her patched belly. The tugs steer wide, but the channel is narrow, and the current's unpredictable. Every man knows one mistake here could tear open the hull and undo months of work in seconds. On the salvage barge, Hathaway, the diver who first mapped her wounds, watches silently, fists clenched. He knows every inch of that wreckage. He's brushed his hands over the steel graves of men still entombed in their ships below. "Easy, easy," a tug operator mutters into his mic. The lines strain. Engines roar. Water boils beneath the hull. West Virginia glides past the memorial that doesn't yet exist, Arizona's submerged tomb, her shadow passing over the silent wreck beneath. A gust of wind rattles loose metal on her half-built deck. For a moment, everything holds. Then, a jolt, a shudder. The forward tug captain curses into his headset. Wallin snaps his head toward the harbor waterline. Something big, has scraped along the battleship's starboard side. The water churns darker for a moment. A diver waves frantically from the shallows. "Debris! She hit debris!" Wallin's heart slams into his ribs. Damage? The diver dips beneath the surface. Seconds stretch, long and suffocating. Men across the harbor watch the water, waiting for him to reappear. He surfaces with a gasp. No breach detected. A wave of relief sweeps across the crews. Some men cheer. Others sink to their knees. But the tow must continue. The tugs ease her forward again, adjusting course, swinging wide to avoid the last graveyard scars. The ship creaks, groans, but she keeps moving. By the time she clears Battleship Row, the sun is fully risen, washing her rusted, broken hull in pale gold. And then, at precisely 11:43 a.m., the tug Kaneohe gives one last pull, guiding her gently toward the dry dock gates. Cheers erupt across the harbor. She's made it. Sailors throw their hats in the air. Divers slap the water with open palms. Even the stoic welders grin beneath their soot-streaked faces. Wallin just stands there, staring at the floating wreck. He refused to surrender. He feels the sting in his eyes and doesn't bother to hide it. "Get her inside," he says quietly. Inside the dry dock, pumps roar to life, and the water begins to drain. Inch by inch, her hull emerges, scarred, bent, pockmarked with torpedo wounds and temporary patches. It looks like the skin of some ancient sea monster hauled from a myth. But beneath the ruin, she still has shape, still has strength, still has a future. Hours later, as the last of the water slips away and West Virginia rests on solid keel blocks for the first time since the attack, Wallin runs his hand along the cold, battered steel. "We have her back," he whispers, but no one, not Wallin, not the divers, not the engineers, can yet imagine what she will become. Because the next phase won't just restore her, it will transform her. What rises from this dry dock won't be the same ship that sank. It will be something stronger, something deadlier, something reborn for a new kind of war. A ship that will make German naval officers question everything they think they know about American power. And the transformation is about to begin. But first, they must confront the horrors still sealed inside her hull. The dry dock gates slam shut behind West Virginia with a metallic thunder that echoes across the yard. Pumps rumble to life, shaking the concrete beneath the workers' feet. Slowly, uneasily, the water drains away, revealing more of the ship's scarred hull with every passing hour. By late afternoon, her lower decks, flooded for 6 months, are exposed to daylight for the first time since the attack. Oil drips from her seams like black tears, mud cakes the flanges. The torpedo holes gape open like the wounds of some wounded leviathan dragged ashore. But the most difficult work, the most painful work, waits inside. And every man in the yard knows it. Commander Wallin gathers a small team of officers, chaplains, and salvage crew leaders at the foot of the gangway. The sunlight is harsh, casting long shadows beneath their helmets. "We start interior entry inspections tonight," Wallin says. His voice is firm but softer than usual. "We do this with respect. No one needs to ask what he means. The interior of West Virginia holds secrets no diver could safely reach. Compartments sealed during the attack, some intentionally to keep the ship afloat, now sit dry and silent. What lies behind those doors has waited for 6 long months. Some men feared the discovery. Others dreaded it. But every one of them knew it was coming. They don their gear and climb aboard. Inside the ship, the air feels wrong. Dry dock lights hang from cables, throwing harsh white beams down blackened corridors. The walls are streaked with soot. Warped doors stand half open. The deck plates creak beneath every step, as if the ship herself is waking up to strangers moving through her bones. They begin in the forward compartments, those known to be empty. Bunk rooms, storage lockers, the galley charred and twisted, the medical ward, its cabinets torn open by flooding. They move quietly because the silence feels sacred, almost fragile. But eventually they reach the sealed doors. The first one is riveted shut, a watertight barrier sailors had dogged down during the chaos to save the ship. The bolts are rusted. The steel is cold. Chaplain William McGuire removes his helmet, bows his head, and murmurs something none of the workers try to hear. The team waits respectfully until he finishes. Only then does Wallin give the order. Cut it. Sparks burst from the torch as the welders slice through the metal hinges. The heat turns the air thick and sour. When the last bolt falls away, two sailors step forward with crowbars. The door swings inward. Even men who thought they had prepared hadn't. Inside are three sailors, still at their stations, frozen in the positions they held the moment the water swept in. One is seated at a radio desk, hands curled around the headset. Another kneels beside a valve wheel, as though trying to turn it. The third lies near the door, palm pressed flat against the steel, as if trying to signal for help that never came. No one speaks. Some remove their caps. Others stand rigid, fists clenched at their sides. Wallin feels his throat tighten. "These men saved this ship," he says quietly. "Remember that." The chaplain steps forward, blessing the compartment, the air trembling with emotion. The team recovers the remains with care, slowly, respectfully, as if lifting sleeping brothers from their beds. A stretcher squeaks in the hallway. A welder wipes his eyes with an oily sleeve and pretends it's from the smoke. But there are more compartments, more sealed doors, more stories frozen in time. One room holds a group of signalmen gathered around a ladder, as if trying to escape before the water overtook them. Another holds two cooks, still near the stoves, where breakfast had been interrupted by hell itself. In a machinery space, a young sailor stands upright, braced against a valve assembly, steel fingers locked on a lever he must have fought with until the last possible second. Every discovery is a new wound, every recovery a reminder of the day the harbor burned. But the worst moment comes when they reach a storage trunk deep in the forward damage control compartment. It's sealed, untouched since December 7th. When they break it open expecting tools or supplies, the odor hits them instantly. Inside are the bodies of three sailors who had tried to shelter during the attack, men no one even realized were missing. A welder lowers his torch. A mechanic staggers back, leaning against the bulkhead. Even Wallin closes his eyes. The chaplain's voice cracks as he blesses the compartment. They carry the remains out silently, passing through narrow corridors lit by flickering lamps. Men step aside as the stretchers go by, hard hats lowered. At dockside, a formation of sailors stands at attention. A bugler raises his instrument. Taps drifts across the yard, thin, shaky, barely holding together. But it holds. When the last note fades, Wallin turns back toward the gangway. "We finish this," he says. "We finish all of it. Then we rebuild her." Because that is the unspoken promise binding every man on this job. Those who died inside this ship will not have died for scrap metal. The night stretches on. Floodlights glare against steel. Hammers echo through the empty decks. The ship becomes a cathedral of industry and mourning combined. But by dawn, West Virginia is clean. A ship born again, not as she was, but as what the Pacific War now demands. Faster, stronger, deadlier, and when she returns to the ocean, the world will finally understand what American industry can do when pushed to the limit. But they must race against time. The Japanese fleet is on the move. The Pacific War is shifting, and West Virginia must be reborn before the tide turns. And that rebirth begins with ripping out her wounded heart. The dark surface of the Atlantic rolled in a heavy swell as Captain Lieutenant Ernst Bagel wiped a thin sheen of salt water from the bridge periscope of U-boat U-603. It was the early hours of January 1943. the kind of night where the sea and sky blended into one endless sheet of black glass. The only movement came from the cold wind and the low thrum of diesel engines far below. He scanned the horizon again. Nothing. Just the groan of the Atlantic and the faint smell of oil from his own boat. Then, a shadow. Low, angular, impossible. He steadied the scope. There, barely lit by the moon through the clouds, moved a shape he knew by heart. A silhouette every Kriegsmarine officer had studied in detail during training. A battleship. Not just any battleship. One that should not exist here. One that the German Navy had officially recorded as destroyed. Bagel lifted his eye from the scope, breath fogging the frigid air. Das kann nicht sein. That can't be. He pressed his eye back to the glass. There she was again, clearer now, as a gap opened in the cloud cover, 4 massive turrets, a tower-like superstructure, that distinctive, unmistakable bridge profile. The USS Nevada. The battleship that had taken torpedoes and bombs at Pearl Harbor. The battleship that the Germans had been told was lying at the bottom of the harbor. The battleship they had crossed off all intelligence lists nearly 2 years earlier. Yet here she was, cutting through the dark Atlantic with destroyers escorting her in a tight screen, and not limping, not barely afloat. No. She moved like a revived giant, steady, purposeful, alive. Impossible, Bagel whispered. One of his junior officers appeared beside him on the bridge. Herr Kapitän, what do you see? Bagel hesitated because he knew how insane it would sound, how laughable, how utterly unbelievable. But the silhouette didn't change. He spoke slowly. A battleship, the profile of Nevada. The officer blinked in confusion. But she was sunk at Pearl Harbor. Bagel didn't answer. He didn't have to. The ocean, uncaring and vast, rolled beneath them as if announcing the truth with each wave. Down in the control room, whispers spread. Crewmen exchanged uncertain glances. An engineer crossed himself. If the Americans could resurrect a ship that had been blown apart at Pearl Harbor, if they could drag a dead battleship back into the fight, what else were they capable of? Bagel lowered the periscope and turned to his men with a grim, quiet certainty. Send a contact report to BDU, he ordered. They must know. The Americans have brought the Nevada back. As the radio man scrambled to prepare the transmission, Bagel remained on the bridge, gripping the cold metal railing. He realized the implications faster than anyone aboard. This wasn't just a ship. It was a message, a warning wrapped in steel, a declaration that the United States had industrial strength far beyond German expectations, enough to repair the unrepairable, resurrect the sunk, and throw even its dead warships back into battle. Below the waves, the crew of U-603 waited tensely as the transmission was sent. Bagel knew German intelligence officers would dismiss it at first. They would call it an error, an optical illusion, maybe even stress. But they would be wrong. The ghost ship was real, and she was heading east, straight toward a war the Germans believed she'd never see again. Bagel let the cold wind cut across his face as the American formation disappeared into the darkness. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was why the Nevada was here, and what mission she had been given. A mission that would soon shake the German command even more violently than the sight of the resurrected battleship itself. The first light of dawn touched the Nevada's rebuilt superstructure as she pushed eastward, her gray hull slicing through the Atlantic like a seasoned predator returned from the grave. Fresh paint gleamed where bomb blasts had torn her open at Pearl Harbor. New plating, new guns, new radar. The old battleship now carried scars beneath her armor and purpose within her steel. On the flag bridge, Captain Francis W. Scanland stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the horizon with the calm focus of a man who had survived what should have been his ship's final day. His officers waited silently for him to break the seal on the orders delivered the night before. Orders marked with simple words that carried enormous weight, to be opened only upon arrival in the Atlantic. Scanlan tore the envelope along its edge. Inside, a stack of pages, brief, direct, chilling in simplicity. He exhaled slowly. So this is why they brought us back. The officers leaned closer. The Nevada had not been resurrected for symbolism, not for morale, not even for vengeance. She had been brought back for invasion fire support, a role no other ship could fulfill as ruthlessly or as reliably. The letter spelled it out in clean, typed lines. The United States and her allies were preparing for the largest amphibious operation in modern history. An operation requiring battleships capable of breaking fortified coastlines, smashing bunkers, annihilating artillery, under withering fire. And among the planners in Washington and London, one truth had become clear. No ship was better suited for that task than the Nevada. Scanlon spoke without looking up from the page. "We've been assigned to Operation Neptune." His executive officer stiffened. "The invasion of France?" Scanlon nodded, eyes catching the reflection of dawn on the sea below. "Not just assigned," he said. "We're the lead bombardment ship." The room fell silent. Lead ship, the first to engage German coastal batteries, the first to enter range of the heaviest guns in occupied France, the first to draw fire so troop transports could slip in behind her. One officer whispered what the others were already thinking. "We're going to take the brunt of it." Scanlon folded the orders and slid them into his coat. "We'll take it," he said, "and we'll give back more." The men didn't applaud, they didn't smile. They simply nodded with the grim acceptance of sailors who had already once escaped death together. Below deck, in the rebuilt engine rooms, the Nevada's turbines roared with a throaty confidence. New blades, new mounts, new precision. Sailors moved between consoles with practiced familiarity, hands steady, posture proud. In the gunnery towers, crews serviced the 14-inch guns, checking breech seals polished to a mirror sheen. Shell hoists clanged. Powder bags thumped into racks. The ship was alive in a way she hadn't been in decades. The Nevada wasn't just repaired, she was transformed. And the Germans sensed something was coming. Across the English Channel, in a bunker near Cherbourg, Oberst Hans Michelson of the Coastal Artillery Corps studied intercepted communications, fragments about ship movements, escort patterns, radar signals. His analysts argued among themselves. Some believed the Americans were moving carriers. Others suggested heavy cruisers. But one clue froze Michelson in place. A low-frequency radar signature, old yet unmistakable. A ship with an outdated profile but new modifications. He frowned. "That can't be right." A technician stepped closer. "Sir?" Michelson tapped the report. "This signal. It resembles a battleship we listed as destroyed years ago." The technician looked confused. "But if it was sunk—" "I know what the list says," Michelson snapped, then steadied his voice. "But the Americans are moving something big, and they've taken great pains to hide it." He stared at the paper for a long moment, because if the Americans had truly dragged a sunken battleship back from the dead, if they had rebuilt it strong enough for an invasion, then the German Atlantic Wall was in more danger than anyone in Berlin dared imagine. He looked up at the gun emplacements outside his bunker, rows of artillery silhouetted against the cold gray sky. "What are they planning?" he murmured. But he already knew. The Allies weren't just preparing to cross the Channel. They were preparing to rip open Fortress Europe. And the first blow, the very first hammer strike, would come from a battleship the Germans believed they had already buried. The Nevada was coming, and she would announce her return with fire. Night cloaked the English Channel in a dense, oily fog on June 6, 1944, a fog so thick it swallowed the world beyond a few ship lengths. But deep within that darkness, the Nevada moved with the slow, steady certainty of a veteran fighter stepping back into the ring. Her deck lights were dimmed. Her crew stood at stations. Her guns, silent for now, pointed toward France like patient beasts waiting to be unleashed. In the early morning gloom, you could hear it, the pulse of thousands of engines, the creaking of troop transports laden with men who whispered prayers into their helmets, the soft hum of destroyers slicing the waves. But above all of it, you felt something else, a presence, a gravity. The Nevada, the ghost ship, the battleship resurrected from the mud of Pearl Harbor. She held her place at the head of Bombardment Group A, leading a column of warships toward the most heavily fortified beach in Hitler's Atlantic Wall, Utah Beach. Captain Scanlon stood on the starboard wing of the bridge, staring toward the invisible shoreline. The fog carried the strange smell of Europe, wet earth, coal smoke drifting over from the French coast, the metallic tang of distant artillery waiting to speak. Behind him, Commander James Semmes studied the radar scope, green lines sweeping in methodical arcs. Range-to-shore batteries approximately 12,000 yards, Semmes said quietly. We're almost in their throat. Scanlon nodded once. Almost time. Below, in the forward turrets, gun crews waited near the breeches of the 14-inch guns, monsters loaded with Battleship 400-pound armor-piercing shells. Some of the sailors rested their hands on the cool steel as if touching the hide of an old warhorse. A few whispered the same words they'd said during Pearl Harbor. "To your worst, we'll do ours." Then the fog thinned, just for a moment, just long enough. Out of the gray came the jagged silhouettes of Normandy's bluffs, dark ridges that concealed German batteries, machine gun nests, reinforced concrete casemates, and the iron heart of the Atlantic Wall. Semmes turned toward Scanlon. "We have visual." Scanlon lifted a pair of binoculars and locked onto a distant shape. A massive reinforced gun bunker, one the Germans had believed impervious to naval fire. He exhaled. "Open the bombardment." A moment of silence followed, and then the world split open. The Nevada's No. 1 turret fired first. A thunderclap of raw force shook the deck, rattling teeth vibrating through every beam and rivet like the heartbeat of the ship itself. The recoil sent a rolling tremor down her length. Seconds later, Turret 2 unleashed its own volley. Across the water, the shells arched into the gray sky, black dots trailing smoke, climbing, then descending in a perfect mathematical arc toward the coastline. On shore, German gunners inside the Azoville and Crisbeck batteries looked up in confusion. Shells? This early? From where? Then the first Nevada shell hit. A flash of white gold erupted from the French soil as thousands of pounds of explosive force tore open a bunker roof. Concrete shattered like pottery. Men were thrown like rag dolls. Dust and debris spiraled upward in violent plumes. Seconds later, another detonation struck farther along the ridge. A gun emplacement vanished in a geyser of dirt and flame. German Oberleutnant Kurt Hapke, manning the rangefinder at Battery Crisbeck, recoiled from the shockwave. Was Wardes? What was that? His sergeant stared at the horizon, eyes widening, disbelief spreading across his face. Ein Schlachtschiff. Hapke blinked. Impossible. The Americans have no battleship positioned so close. But then the fog shifted again, peeling back like a curtain. And there she was, a hulking silhouette. Tall masts, a massive tower bridge, 4 turrets. For a moment, Hapke thought he was hallucinating. Es ist die Nevada. Laughter broke out, wild, confused, frightened. "That ship is sunk," one gunner shouted. "It was sunk at Pearl Harbor." But the Nevada didn't care what German intelligence had written. She was very much alive, and she was angry. Her next broadside ripped through the morning haze with terrifying precision. The Germans scrambled to return fire. Rangefinders spun. Orders were barked. Ammunition carts rattled. But they were seconds too slow. Nevada shells tore through communication lines, collapsed casemates, ignited ammo stores, and blasted open trenches carved into the cliffs. Her gunnery officer, Lieutenant Commander William Dwyer, called out new coordinates as fast as spotters fed them. Sweat slicked his palms. His voice never wavered. "Shift fire, battery at grid 14B. Guns, ready. Send them everything we have." The Nevada answered with a roar. On shore, Hapke felt the ground trembling beneath him. "What are they doing?" he whispered. His sergeant swallowed hard. "They're clearing the way for an invasion." Hapke understood instantly. The fog, the heavy bombardment, the scale of the fleet moving in the dark. This wasn't a raid. This wasn't harassment. This was the end of German control of Western Europe, and the first blow had come from a battleship they had already crossed off their list. As the fog lifted further, revealing lines of troop transports approaching the French coast, Hapke whispered words he never imagined he'd say. "They have brought their dead back to life, and they're using them to break our wall." Behind him, another Nevada shell landed, sending a shock wave through his bunker, shaking dust from the ceiling. He grabbed a railing to keep his footing. Mein Gott. But he wasn't praying. He was realizing the truth. The Americans hadn't just rebuilt a ship. They had rebuilt a symbol, a promise, a message to every German gun crew along the Atlantic Wall. If you couldn't kill us at Pearl Harbor, you won't stop us here. And the Nevada was only getting started. The morning sun burned through the remaining mist as USS Nevada continued her relentless march along the Normandy coast. Every shell fired was more than ordnance. It was a statement. Each detonation a thunderous echo of industrial might, of resilience, of sheer American determination. Sailors felt the vibration through the soles of their boots, through the bulkheads, through every fiber of the ship itself. Captain Scanlon remained on the bridge, binoculars glued to the horizon. His eyes tracked the shattered bunkers, twisted artillery, and collapsed fortifications with clinical precision. He didn't smile, he didn't cheer, but inside, a quiet satisfaction pulsed. He had brought a ship back from the grave, and now it was delivering a fury that the Axis powers could never have anticipated. Below deck, engine rooms hummed with the smooth, deep cadence of turbines restored to perfection. Sailors manned their stations with calm efficiency. The drills and procedures they had run countless times in Pearl Harbor's shipyards now tested in the ultimate crucible, live combat. Every crewman knew the cost of failure, and every hand moved as though the ship itself had memorized their motions. And the Germans? They were beginning to understand the nightmare they faced. In a coastal command bunker overlooking Omaha Beach, Oberstleutnant Friedrich von Richter squinted through his binoculars. Smoke still rose in thin gray plumes where artillery bunkers had been obliterated. Men staggered from shattered foxholes, wounded and bewildered. He could barely comprehend what he was seeing. The Nevada, he whispered, voice tight, she's alive. His adjutant swallowed hard, shivering in the chill wind. Sir, reports indicate she was lost at Pearl Harbor. We have no confirmation, but she is firing on our positions. Von Richter's knuckles whitened around the binoculars. We were told she would never fight again, and now she's here, leading them. Across the battlefield, the Nevada's gunnery officers recalculated trajectories on the fly, directing shells with terrifying accuracy. Coastal artillery that had once seemed impenetrable now lay in rubble. Communications lines were shredded. The landscape was transformed by firepower thought lost to history. A young lieutenant, gunpointer Seaman Thomas Tommy Lane, felt the recoil of a 14-inch shell tear through his body with every broadside. He gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on a bunker, rising from the smoke. "That's for the boys at Pearl Harbor," he muttered, almost inaudibly. And indeed, it was. Every shattered wall, every collapsed turret, every bunker erased from the map was a tribute to the ship's fallen crew. The resurrected Nevada carried their memory into battle, embodying the American refusal to stay defeated. Meanwhile, German intelligence was frantic. Every decrypted report, every eyewitness account, confirmed what the U-boat captains and coastal commanders had feared. A ship previously considered lost was not only afloat but strategically decisive. The Axis High Command convened emergency meetings. Maps were redrawn, coastal batteries repositioned, and naval strategists scrambled to understand the impossible. Capitan Zerzé Otto Kaler's fingers traced the chart of the English Channel. He leaned back in his chair, face pale, eyes wide. They rebuilt her," he said, voice hollow, "from the harbor mud, and she's leading the assault. How?" He didn't have an answer. Nobody did. Back on the deck of the Nevada, the battle raged with terrifying elegance. Smoke and dust swirled around the superstructure as spotters adjusted fire for every new target. Shells tore into German defenses with surgical precision, opening gaps for the approaching Allied infantry and tanks. Every thunderous blast reinforced the reality that the Nevada was no longer just a battleship. She was a weapon, a symbol, a reminder that American ingenuity could rewrite the rules of war. And as the invasion unfolded along the beaches, one undeniable truth became clear to both the attackers and the defenders. The ship they had written off, the dead battleship, had returned. Stronger, fiercer, unstoppable. The Germans would not forget this day. And the Americans? They would remember it as the moment one ship defied death itself and changed the course of history. But even as shells fell and bunkers collapsed, Captain Scanlon knew this was just the beginning. The Nevada had returned, yes, but the war was far from over. Every mile she steamed, every gun fired, carried the weight of expectation of vengeance of a nation unwilling to yield. And somewhere, across the channel, the ghost of Pearl Harbor's devastation whispered through the smoke, "Never underestimate the United States. Never believe a giant truly falls." The Nevada would continue to fight. And with each engagement, German officers would face the same cold, unyielding reality. The Americans could rebuild the destroyed, reclaim the impossible, and strike back with a power that seemed almost supernatural. The ghost ship was alive, and she was just getting started. By late afternoon, the haze over Utah Beach had begun to lift, revealing the full scope of the devastation wrought by USS Nevada. Smoke coiled over crumbled bunkers and splintered trenches, twisted metal and shattered concrete, littering the sand like remnants of some colossal storm. Sailors on the Nevada's deck paused for only a heartbeat, enough to feel the scale of what they had unleashed, then returned to their stations. Captain Scanlon walked the bridge, binoculars scanning the horizon. Every incoming report confirmed what he already knew. The Nevada was not merely participating in the invasion. She was pioneering it, carving paths for troop transports and landing craft that followed in her wake. Where her guns fired, German defenses crumbled. Where she led, men could safely land. Every volley was both punishment and protection, a dual-purpose weapon made from courage, steel, and sheer will. Below decks, the crew worked tirelessly. Ammunition handlers ran shells to the turrets with mechanical precision. Fire control technicians adjusted targeting instruments with unwavering focus. Engineers monitored turbines and boilers, ensuring that the ship's resurrected heart never faltered. Every man aboard knew the stakes. Failure wasn't an option, and failure wasn't just personal. It would cost lives on the beaches below. On shore, German officers could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Oberst Hans Michelson, stationed at a forward command post overlooking Omaha, wiped his glasses repeatedly, convinced his eyes were deceiving him. That ship should be at the bottom of the Pacific," he whispered to his aide, "yet she leads their fleet untouched." The aide shook his head, lips pale. "It's as if—" She rose from the grave. Michelson's hand tightened around his binoculars. "She's more than a ship," he said. "She's a symbol. Every man on the beach, every soldier watching. They will see this and know what it means. The Americans will never yield." And indeed, the psychological impact was immediate. Reports trickled back from Allied troops ashore. Morale surged. Men whispered in disbelief about the battleship that should have been dead. Soldiers who had heard the stories of Pearl Harbor and feared the Axis would underestimate them now saw proof that the United States could turn catastrophe into triumph. Even some of the German gun crews hesitated, fumbling with rangefinders or abandoning their stations for moments of disbelief. The Nevada's mere presence unsettled them, sowing fear that undermined even the most fortified positions. Back on the ship, Captain Scanlon didn't allow himself to dwell on heroism or awe. His focus was tactical, methodical. Every decision had consequences. Every maneuver was calculated. Yet even he could feel the weight of history pressing down through the steel of the ship. They had resurrected a dead battleship, not merely to fight, but to send a message. The United States could rise from its worst disasters and strike back stronger than before. As the afternoon progressed, the Nevada's gunners continued their relentless bombardment, silencing the last German batteries that threatened the landing zones. Each turret rotation, each shell fired, was a reminder of a past attack, a vindication for the fallen sailors who had once perished inside her steel. Every explosion along the coastline echoed like the voice of the ship itself. We endure, we return, we fight. By nightfall, as darkness began to settle over the beaches, the Nevada anchored just beyond the horizon, guns lowered, but readiness absolute. Smoke from the day's barrage mingled with the night air, leaving a haze that masked her silhouette, yet carried her presence unmistakably to all who had witnessed her fire. Captain Scanlon gazed toward the distant shore, reflecting on the improbable journey of this battleship. From torpedoed wreck at Pearl Harbor to refloated ghost of a vessel, to the spearhead of the largest amphibious invasion the world had ever seen, she had become more than steel, more than machinery. She was a testament to resilience, a living emblem of a nation refusing to be broken. Somewhere across the channel, German officers scribbled frantic reports. Analysts argued, strategists recalculated, and Naval Command reconsidered every assumption they had held about the American Navy. The impossible had become reality. The battleship that should have been lost was now unquestionably alive and lethal. And though the fighting on the beaches would continue for days, weeks, and months, the first strike, delivered by the resurrected Nevada, had already changed the course of the war. The Germans had mocked the United States' losses. They had assumed a sunken ship was gone forever. They were wrong, and the Nevada's guns, freshly loaded, would continue to remind them of that truth. Her resurrection wasn't just a repair, it was a statement, a thunderous, unmistakable, immortal statement. You cannot kill what refuses to stay dead. The days that followed Normandy's first bombardments were a blur of smoke, fire, and relentless movement. USS Nevada remained at the forefront, her rebuilt guns firing tirelessly to support the advancing Allied troops. Every cratered bunker, every shattered artillery emplacement bore the unmistakable signature of her firepower. She had become more than a ship. She was a legend made flesh, a reminder of what tenacity, ingenuity, and sheer will could achieve. Captain Scanlon often walked the deck at dawn, staring at the horizon where the morning sun ignited the waves in streaks of gold. He remembered the first days after Pearl Harbor, the charred decks, the gutted interior, the body still trapped inside. And yet here she was, alive again, leading men into history, reshaping the battlefield, defying every expectation. The crew shared a quiet reverence for the ship. Gun crews would glance at their turrets before firing. Engineers would touch the consoles with a gentle respect. Sailors would pat the deck plates as they passed, as though honoring the steel that had carried them from ruin into victory. Every man knew that West Virginia, like her sister Nevada, had become more than a vessel of war. She was a symbol of American resolve, of refusal to accept defeat, of rebirth against impossible odds. Across the Atlantic, German officers could not shake the image of the dead battleship alive and wreaking havoc. Reports reached Berlin, where strategists struggled to account for the Americans' industrial might and engineering audacity. Kapiteins like Bagel and Kaler realized that the destruction of Pearl Harbor had not broken the United States. It had merely provoked a comeback beyond their imagination. Even after the battle, the story of the resurrected battleships traveled swiftly through naval circles. Sailors in every port would whisper it to one another, officers would recount the tale in mess halls, and journalists would describe the ship that rose from the dead. It became more than history. It became a living narrative, inspiring the men who would fight in the Pacific and Atlantic theaters alike. For decades afterward, the ghost ship legacy endured. Naval engineers studied her salvage and reconstruction as a benchmark of possibility. Historians framed her story as a turning point in modern naval warfare, and the public marveled at the sheer audacity of resurrecting what had been lost. But beyond the technical achievement, beyond the battlefield impact, lay the emotional truth. The ship carried the spirit of the sailors who had died defending her. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. Their ship had not remained at the bottom of Pearl Harbor. It had returned, resurrected, reborn, and ready to fight again. And every time the guns of Nevada or West Virginia roared over the ocean, every time shells tore through fortified bunkers, the Germans and the world were reminded. The United States could turn despair into power. The impossible could become reality. Even death could be defied when men refused to give up. As the smoke cleared and the waves settled, one truth remained etched into the history of the Pacific and Atlantic theaters. A battleship once deemed lost had risen, not only to fight, but to become a symbol of a nation's indomitable will. And in that resurrection, the Germans learned what the Americans already knew. You never count out a country that refuses to stay down.